to Lilith, who's going to start us today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Isabel. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here. And the whole idea behind today's session, in particular this one, is just to showcase to you all the amazing and great research that some of our Birkbeck students and alumni are doing. So we've got a really entertaining hour ahead for you all. We've got 3 speakers, all of whom are Birkbeck alumni who either graduated last year previously. And what we'll do is we'll start off with one speaker, and then we'll have some questions and answers if you've got any questions to do. Then we'll move on to the second speaker and then do questions, move on to the third speaker and do questions. And then we might have a slight debrief at the end. So this should take about an hour or so. So our first speaker for today will be Victoria, and she'll talk about coaching as a tool for emancipation, or whether it can be used as a tool for emancipation. Our second speaker will then be Cordelia. We'll look at the relationship between people who are in semi-retirement in their career and how those two work together. And then we'll close with Nomita, who will talk about gig workers, in particular lawyers who are working as freelancers, and how they engage in what she terms career crafting. So without taking up too much of your time, I will now pass on to Victoria, who will start off by telling you about coaching as a potential, possible, perhaps, tool for emancipation. Over to you, Victoria.
Right, just start this playing. Does everyone see that? Yeah, thank you, Lilith. It's really lovely to be allowed back here. I've missed everybody. Life after Birkbeck. There is one. Yeah, but you miss it. Anyway, so I'm going to dive in. I'm reading from a script because I have dyslexia and I'm challenged in the working memory department. Right. Why is that not moving on? Okay. I'll start with defining my use of the term emancipation. I'm influenced here by Weston's framing of macro-emancipation, which takes a critical theory lens to make visible the invisible operations of power in social structures, discourse, and symbolic practice. I understand taking an emancipatory coaching position to be an ethical position that broadens the focus of coaching from profit goals and performance to consider wider global social and environmental justice concerns. Coaching for emancipation challenges the mantra of do no harm. By do no harm often seems to me to equate to not upsetting the status quo, and rather positions coaching as an active pursuit of good. My research aims were to explore the accounts of coaches who have an articulated emancipatory, critical and social change approaches to their practice. It aims to reveal the culturally, socially situated knowledge constructions, values and belief in these counter-narratives, and explore the development of the storyteller's critical and emancipatory coaching practice, and what structural barriers are encountered in coaching for emancipation. The research method of this study was narrative inquiry and storytelling, and I think the best way to contextualize this research is and to situate it within coaching psychology and to illuminate my speaking position is to begin with telling my own story, that which brought me to coaching and through my journey at Birkbeck. The remainder of the presentation will focus on the construction of the research, its findings, and the implications for the future. I work within the cultural and heritage sector, and I'm a learning partner for cultural and heritage organisations, particularly as they recognise their crucial role in acknowledging and exploring the cultural, social, economic and political roots of the Earth crisis. These are helpfully illustrated by my son and can be found in cultural theories of the Anthropocene. I look to coaching to develop empathetic communication, active listening and transformative learning capacities. What surprised me was, despite my course providing a robust critical lens, with notable exception, coaching literature seemed dominated by normative thinking and the language of growth, economics and individualism. I found pages of research focused on providing a causal link between particular coaching modalities and improved performance of agentic participants. Invariably, those coaching modalities were based on behavioural and positive psychology. I've been struck most recently by papers that have emerged during and following the COVID-19 pandemic and during the war in Europe the majority I've seen has similarly focused on demonstrating how certain coaching modalities support individual well-being and how well-being is linked to performance, productivity and efficiency. The definitions of well-being employed in these papers ignore the interdependencies of our ecosystem and reduce coaching to a functionist role in achieving reductive ends. I had no idea that coaching was such a business, an industry in itself, oiled by the monetizing accreditation, coding practice, and selling training to meet competency frameworks. All in all, I found much literature on what Western calls micro goal-focused practice, but virtually nothing on applying a critical lens. Disappointingly, I seem to be discovering that coaching had a largely functionalist and instrumental role in serving the Western corporate culture from which it emerged. And when coaching did engage with these issues by diversity, inclusion, or environmental concerns, it did so within a Western capitalist paradigm. It seemed to me that coaching had great potential as an emancipatory practice, and I'm not alone in that. There are strong narratives locating coaching as an enabler for social change gaining traction. As Judy Gannon coins it, a social turn is taking place in coaching. There is evidence that coaching practice is evolving in response to increasing awareness of the present and approaching its essential crisis. Stories are socially situated knowledge constructions that organise past, present and future information for people to interpret events and reveal values and beliefs and experience that guide those interpretations. The participants told stories of resistance, which revealed the dominant narrative through its impact on the teller, and their struggle to author a different story from within normative confines. These counter-narratives, told from within the margin, reveal alternative truths and make coaching visible as a social process. I see congruence with the disruptive capacity of acknowledging stories of conveyors of multiple possible truths and the intention of coaching for emancipation, which takes a constructivist and critical approach to support the retelling of narratives, facilitate new ways of seeing, expose ideologies and stimulate creativity, imagine better futures and support change. I invited coaches with a well-articulated critical and emancipatory approach to their practice. Selecting the stories was a difficult process, and I'm still challenged by thoughts of what I left out. I acknowledge the power I have as a narrator. Every time I revisit this research, I re-story it. The stories all began with backgrounds as to why the coaches were drawn to coaching, how their careers developed and where coaching fitted in, and critical moments where participants acknowledged coaching as a normative, uncritical practice and were challenged to consider its and their purpose. I gave the stories descriptive titles. As you will hear, these titles encapsulate findings that I prioritised in my research. Alan's is an origin story, which recalls the development of coaching as an industry, as his personal ethical challenges in that evolution. Alan had been practicing as a business and human resources consultant for many years and had witnessed the development of coaching as an industry. He described how coaching evolved as a practice and how professional bodies in coaching emerged. He described scaremongering stories that codified practice frameworks by coaching bodies in order that they could sell their products. He described a lack of democracy. Others contributed financially in order to gain. This story problematizes professional coaching bodies, how codification potentially homogenizes practice and affects representation and creativity. It's also critique excellence of the goals of corporate and uncritical coaching culture. It talks of how the discourse of coaching mimics that of corporations. This is in their essay Power of the Tale, storytelling towards client professionalism. He expresses frustration at the uninvolved engagement with ethics by professional coaching bodies in their ethical codes and suggests directing us to do harm doesn't cut it. The second story is a rejection of coaching as a profession. Eva had formerly been a well-earning, high-profile executive coach. didn't, when I felt impassioned by her narrative. In the very hot summer of 2018, Eva felt compelled to move out of the coaching space into an active one, aligned with coaching with an extractive capitalist coaching culture, in which is described as driving environmental collapse and global injustice. She rejects coaching with a big C and describes skills that are associated with coaching, like connecting relationally, listening deeply, using somatic skills to connect non-verbally. She claims these skills are not restricted to coaches. This story is told by someone who embraces coaching as a profession but rejects its instrumentalization. Jim is a Malayan Muslim coach in Singapore, where he's considered part of an ethnic minority. His is a moving story of power and compliance, where the coach describes the emotional, somatic effects of aligning himself with a dominant culture, in which his work is measured in metrics and return on investment. He describes the effects of working hard to fit in, whilst having internalized a sense of cultural inferiority. The narrator describes parallel processes, a story of a family member who, in order to survive, colluded with the Chinese in 1942. He reveals the deep cultural roots of his oppression. He also acknowledges that in coaching his clients for compliance, he was replicating the same normative oppression. He describes how his practice has emerged from this understanding. My view is we deceive ourselves if we imagine that we can practice without our biases influencing the process. I'm relaxed about giving clarity about where I'm coming from, but I see myself as a non-directive coach and try to take care to ensure my clients have the autonomy to make up their own minds. Just as we might challenge our clients if we heard them give an account of workplace bullying or sexual harassment, I might also challenge them with respect to their contribution towards racial equality or environmental sustainability. I see my role as helping them to make sense of their organisation's responsibility in relation to these issues and in their role as influencers of the system. I'm not attached to my clients reaching a particular conclusion on them, though. In this final story, it picks up on the traumas caused by systemic cultural, social and economic oppression and disadvantage. Jan worked in a knowledge-based, one-size-fits-all education system that leaves teachers with limited pedagogical choices. The narrator tells of ethical stress caused by the misalignment of practice and values that is experienced by both the coach and her coachees, thereby revealing another parallel process of oppression and emancipation. They describe realizing the limitations of behavioural and positive psychology coaching modalities. The narrator talks about feeling like they were patching up clients to return them to a war zone. They observe clients locating systemic problems internally. They suggest the development of a coaching palette that borrows from liberation psychology, that recognises that individuals are not their own self-actualization, but are created in relation to their social, historical, political and economic conditions. These frames need to take the history of colonialism, racism, sexism and mainstream coaching into account. And that mainstream coaching does not. The narrator also talked about alternative organising for coaches, networks to collectively support critical and emancipatory coaching approaches, ecosystems of coaching through collective activity that bring counter-narratives into the mainstream, conscious coaching, the climate coaching Alliance, Critical Coaches and Philosopher's Stone Collective. This research was highly iterative and it drew from the analysis of the interviews and from the literature the following three questions that inform my discussion of the findings. What is the alternative to assuming a position of neutrality in the coaching space for critical coaches? Critical researchers all call for a more explicit disclosure and explanation of coaches' social and political commitments, as well as their ethical frames. There is no neutral context or position for coaches to operate from. Three of the participants articulated how they can be reflexive, transparent, intentional in contracting and still practice critical but non-directive coaching. What is important is that the context is recognised. In Eva's case, she was practicing what might be considered coaching
Victoria, sorry to interrupt you. I think I've lost your sound. I don't know if that's if anyone else is having the same issue.
Coaching supports adaptation, but has little to address the psychologies of oppression. Supri calls for coaching to learn from the frameworks of other professions and that engage in the internalisation of social discourse. He refers to critical pedagogy in education that balances human agency with an awareness of social structure and wonders what coaching can learn from psychologies of liberation. Weston points to a vital link between depth analysis as a psychosocial approach, discourse and analysis, which explores the power dynamics hidden in normative discourse, and emancipation. There is more for coaching to learn from psychosocial methodologies. How can the coaching body politic and collective informal collaboration and networking support critical coaching, from professionalisation to social networking? Supri and Cox discuss professional coaching bodies' role in encouraging the whole industry to become more aware of the social underpinnings in top-down change. Although having all but rejected coaching as a profession in her story, Eva refers to the Climate Coaching Alliance. This is a grassroots, voluntary-run network of coaches who are engaging deeply with the causes of the climate's environmental crisis. Jan suggests that coaches have been connecting with their ethics for the ethics of their work and critical coaching for decades, but having not galvanised in a collective response. I think we need places to work together to develop approaches. I think we need to develop those networks and ecosystems that this becomes more mainstream. How can coaches committed to ethical practice and social justice find agency and leverage? Can social grassroots networks support emancipation and critical coaching practitioners to situate themselves outside the system as a movement? Interestingly, all the coaches in this study make their main income from something other than coaching, or they describe themselves as being privileged to be financially secure enough to not need to make money through coaching. This affords them a level of autonomy and enables them to take a critical position in relation to the dominant discourse. Gannon and Weston suggest that a study of coaches' pro bono work would be fruitful. I would add that a study of emerging networks of coaches wanting to affect systemic and social change, e.g. philosophers, Zone Collective, Critical Coaches Collective, Climate Conscious Coaching, who organise in distributed network, non-hierarchical, knowledge-sharing communities. Further, it might also be interesting, as Eva described, to see how coaching skills such as holding space, active listening, empathetic relational communication, somatic awareness are informing prefigurative organising in the tactics of new social movements. I think I'm at time, so I'm not going to talk through the wrap up, but maybe I'll just leave that there.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Thank you. Right, so I am happy to open for questions. I can start off the questions. I thought the third question was really interesting in terms of sort of how to balance that professional gatekeeping with safe practice. And I know Janet and I have had this conversation a couple of times over the last year, is how do we balance being inclusive and welcoming in the profession whilst also ensuring safe and an expert level of practice? What do you think? What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I suppose what I'm talking about in the paper is both sort of change from within and pressure from without. And I think one of the things I've put down actually in the wrapping up was education and training. So if these kind of narratives can come through the training, that's obviously, helpful and progressive. But there's always a place for activists, isn't there? Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with tensions.
That's interesting. So we have that responsibility, don't we, in terms of the college, the Birkbeck, the qualifications.
I was also interested to ask, if I may, Victoria, you obviously were attracted very much personally to the idea of thinking about this broader role that we might all take or need to be aware of. And I was just wondering if you've got a moment just to say what it meant to you. I mean, you clearly chose the research because it had a particular significance for you. So I'd be interested to know a bit about that.
Sorry, I missed the very first bit of your question because my internet went a bit strange.
It was just about what had attracted you originally to ask these questions, these important questions.
Yeah, well, I think I said at the beginning of the presentation that I came to coaching to learn a set of skills, and I was surprised when I arrived. I really hadn't really considered coaching as a big industry in of itself. And then I struggled from very early on with, am I gaining skills or am I entering an industry? And this industry seems to have a language that I find very off-putting and an aesthetic, actually. So that's what I decided I needed to grapple with, and that's really my sort of journey through this research and out the other side here.
Well, thank you very much. It's been really interesting to hear about the way in which you found other coaches wrestling with the same questions, and it feels really important that these questions are asked rather than just assume there's one track and one track only. Appreciate you sharing your work with us.
Right, we might have time for one other question before we move on to our next speaker.
Can I ask a bold question? Coming from where I am, sort of. Thanks, Victoria. Lovely to hear your thoughts. It isn't the first time I've heard you describe your research, but it's just so interesting to, in almost like an iterative way, to listen again to what you're saying, and different things stick. But I'm aware that the coaching program at Birkbeck was not something that you felt particularly addressed these systemic issues in the way that it might have done. So rather boldly, can I ask you what you might like to have seen that you didn't see?
Well, of course, there was, you did have a critical lens, and that was, definitely, important to me. And also, very early on, you suggested that I read Simon Weston, so that was also great. But I guess, embedding it, questioning the purpose of coaching more fully throughout the course, assumptions and what's underpinning this language, maybe inviting different sorts of speakers in, and maybe engaging with those networks of coaches who are, progressing these narratives. I found through Hani Shukri's work, I found Judy Gannon and Charmaine Roche, actually, and I drew Philosopher's Stone, and they're very much pushing this sort of narrative. So I think sort of maybe sort of drilling a bit deeper into those, the systemic part.
Okay, thank you, Victoria, and well done again.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
All right, so thank you very much, Victoria. It was really fantastic listening about your research. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I will now pass on to Janet to introduce our second speaker, Cordelia.
Thank you, and a big welcome to Cordelia. Cordelia most definitely also operates in a space of thinking about the purpose of coaching. So this rather fits rather neatly, I think, onto following on from Victoria's work. I'll just briefly introduce Cordelia. So Cordelia works as a career coach in private practice, as well as with homeless sector staff, and that's certainly how I came across the work that Cordelia has been doing in a really important and interesting sector. Cordelia also offers reflective practice and mediation within the homeless sector, and also manages a team of staff in that space. I should also point out that Cordelia has recently won the Bill Law Award for her research, so she comes with already with a high pedigree with her research. So let me pass over, and I'm sure you'll all be very interested to hear about the work that Cordelia's been busy with. Over to you, Cordelia.
I'm wondering if Cordelia might have frozen at an inopportune moment. Let's give her a minute and see if she can rejoin us.
Yes, the connection overall has been a bit iffy, hasn't it? Sort of cutting in and out.
Yeah, sorry about that to our attendees. I'm not sure if that's an individual connection issue or a Teams issue, but we have had a variety of Teams challenges over the week. So so apologies and thanks for bearing with us while we sort ourselves out this end. If Cordelia is struggling, maybe we could move on to Nomita and then come back to her and afterwards.
Hello, am I back?
Hi, yes, you're back. Yeah.
I'm wondering whether it's sucking up Rob Cordelia's broadband, possibly. Shall we move on to Nomita, and I'll get in touch with Cordelia around the back and see whether we can sort that out at all.
Yeah, let's do that. I'll just get up Nomita's slides.
So a quick reversal of order here then. So Nomita is going to pick up for us, and Nomita is currently based in Singapore, so she's very kindly joined us late in the evening, and somewhere actually, as it turns out, less warm than London. Based in Singapore, Nomita is working as a consultant lawyer and has an international practice as a career coach. And you'll see from the slide that's just popped up that Nomita is going to share with us her research about gig lawyering. I'm sure many of you will understand and hear more about gig work, but to relate it specifically to the work of career coaching with gig lawyers is what we're about to hear from Nomita, and I'll get in contact with Cordelia to see what's going on at her end.
Great. Thank you very much, Janet, and hi to everybody there. Can't see everybody, but great to see so many familiar faces as well. Miss London, definitely. So I think to sort of place this, and thank you very much, Janet, for mentioning this. I am bringing myself into the research, so this is definitely something that comes through with a lot of the reflexivity I've had to do through the research. So as Janet said, I am a lawyer. And most recently, I'm also a career coach. So in a way, this research, if you were questioning as a researcher how objective I am or subjective, question, what your view on research and the construction of knowledge is. Isabel, if I could ask for the next slide, please. Thank you. So I think the background to the research is, as many of you know, gig work is very prevalent in many industries, but in the legal industry, it's actually been a little less prevalent, and more recently, it's become much more emergent. And although careers literature has really studied precarious gig work, we all know about Uber and Uberization of work. Less is known about professional services work in the gig economy, because as many of may think, there's always an association of professional careers following very linear, very stable career paths, and I was just very curious about this emergence because I'd known people. There were new firms or companies being formed around this sort of emergent industry, and I thought, well, actually, I'm really curious to know how to better understand those particular people and how they experience their career transitions. So specifically, my research question, which is set out over there, is how do lawyers experience and respond to their changes working in a professional partnership law firm to gig working? And that is because many, and the overwhelming number of lawyers do start their careers in traditional law firms, but very few are in gig working. So I was specifically looking at this career phenomenon. Next slide, please, Isabel. And this is just a summary of the findings, which I'll go into a bit more detail later on. Was I drew on this emergent theory of career craft and career crafting. I basically constructed a constructivist grounded theory of craft my own way from the experiences of 15 lawyers, and also drawing on from the previous presentation, I also share a constructivist view of knowledge as well. So basically the grounded theory which I crafted really reflected what my participants' various perspectives, which were a combination of agentic and emergent perspectives. And again, this is not, one step, leads to the other, etc. But what I found in the data was there were very, very strong phenomenon going on, which I've divided into these 4 buckets of crafting proactive and reactive actions, crafting goals, priorities, and self-awareness, adjusting to various gains and losses associated with the career transition, and specifically because I was studying lawyers, using what I call big law, which is what the term I constructed, based on literature, but also refers to traditional law firm, using those legal skills, your network and background, as crafting tools. And one of the main findings of the study was that whilst people were seeking change, a lot of people, what I call gig lawyers, so gig law participants, really experience a very paradoxical conflict, as well as a synergistic relationship with their big law past. And again, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please, Isabel. And I adopted, many of you would have heard of grounded theory and the various branches of grounded theory, but I adopted specifically CGT, constructivist grounded theory, because it supported, sorry for the geeky terms, but my epistemology, but basically, because I feel that data and theory is discovered, and most importantly, it is co-constructed between researchers, myself, and the participants. So that's a big caveat. This is not what I just found outside. It's very much co-constructed by me, and so it's very much influenced by what I'm bringing to the research. So the process was very, very iterative, and basically in a snapshot, it involved me collecting first set of interview data, which I had to code line by line, so it's a very, very time-consuming method, and the founder of constructivist grounded theory, Kathy Shamas, really has, there's lots of great literature about how you do this. And you use gerunds, which again, I didn't know about until I really read into it, like feelings, because what you're trying to do from the data is really, really grounding your theory in the language and what you're seeing in the data. And using this method really, really helps to keep your theory grounded in the data. And from there, I had to do lots of memo writing to explore ideas, and basically using participants' in vivo codes, really using their language, really trying to seek meaning in that raw data to address what is happening in the data. Next slide, please, Isabel. And basically, you end up with lots of notes and lots of transcripts, which are coded line by line, and you're looking for patterns, or I was looking really in patterns and categories. And basically, from the data set, you get focus codes, and the most significant ones I got from the data were craft and fit. And that's what I was linking with the literature. And that's how I then built constructed theoretical codes. And there is a concept in grounded theory, or constructivist grounded theory, called theoretic sampling. So you stop recruiting participants when I basically perceived that I couldn't find any more insights from the data. So again, I said 15 at the start. Obviously, this was master's research, not PhD level, so couldn't go on forever. But once I felt I wasn't really getting new insights, conveniently, that was 15. Let's just say that. Next slide, please. And basically, analyzing the data, what I had to do was really look at the literature at the same time as the data. So it's quite different from other sorts of methods where you do your literature review, and then you've got your research question, and then you're sort of supporting your hypothesis or your theory or your research question. I was always going to the literature, so it was very, very iterative. And I put a quote from one of my wonderful participants of a key insight from their transcripts. And if you look, I won't read the quote out for all of you, you can read it, but this basically formed the seeds of my concept of craft, which really became the backbone of theory building. And looking at the literature, there are people who talk about career craft. There are metaphors in careers literature using craft. And I was really fascinated by the fact that the participants used that language, and you could see it in the literature, and that's what I had to do, connect the dots basically. And what I found, at least from the accounts of the participants, that in this context, craft was really about less about reaching, you know, a static destination, because again, we're talking about career transitions. So not from point A to point B, but really a process of shifting a mindset to a different type of way of working. Next slide, please, Isabel. So this is really small, but I'm sure you can see it when we, you know, we do share the slide. So this is a diagrammatic illustration of my results. Again, you know, this is not positivist, you know, research, but so a big caveat is it's presented in a way, it looks neat, but actually it's very, very messy. But these are various, you know, codes which I got from the data, and basically this creates the backbone of the theory. So what you see here is how I found, you know, participants really feeling a lack of fit because they felt they were stuck in a traditional path. And then there was almost a feeling that they had to be breaking free from their own traditional mindset. And that really involved deconstructing the way they were thinking about careers and their own career, and reconstructing something different, which I call, you know, my own way or their own way, basically. And the processes which participants were engaged in are set out there, you know, the proactive, reactive actions. And those are things that, you know, many of us career coaches and those of us in the careers industry, I shouldn't use the word industry, you know, to what Victoria said before, but those of us who coach people, you know, networking and going out and talking to people, etc. But there was also a very strong bit in the data about emergence and how that was really, you know, people found that actually as part of their career narratives, that they found that emergence was a big theme that was coming up as well, and just being very aware that that does happen, even though you're planning something may come up. And of course, you know, this is what all career coaches love, you know, really, really understanding who you are. So crafting the goals, priorities, and self-awareness, you know, knowing who you are, and then adjusting to gains and losses, because in transition, people feel various gains. You know, I may have a different type of job which fits me better, but also losses. And in this case, one of the things, because we're talking about lawyers, many lawyers are very attached to their status. A lot of them felt, you know, a loss of status. So that's just one example of loss and how they adjust to it to find a better fit. And at the bottom of the diagram, you see, you know, what they found as well is that even though they weren't in their big law, traditional law firm world, they were now in this gig law world, they were still using their historical skills and networks and background as crafting tools to create their own way. Next slide, please. So it really was, you know, this craft my own way theory was constructed as a core category. And again, as I said, you know, craft was linking with their participants in vivo codes, like shaping and carving, which I found fascinating because they were using that language. You know, it wasn't me imposing a theory on what they were saying. It was coming from them. And these are the psychosocial processes which I mentioned. And what I said, paradoxically, they were really connected with their big lawyer worlds and their skills, but that was really a tension which many of them were still grappling with, because whilst they wanted to break free, at the same time they were still being pulled back. So there was always a tension there in that transition. Next slide, please, Isabel. And so, you know, from a practical implication, it was really this interesting bit I found about change and how much there's a lot of continuity in change, because a lot of transition theories, career transition theories, talk about, you know, again, point A, point B, quite linear, quite static sometimes. This was very recursive, and there is a lot of oneself still, you know, you're changing, but there's still continuity, and recognizing that was very, very, for me, it really came out in the data. So, you know, as I said, participants may have left big law, but big law has not left them. So that was very, very strong. And this, you know, constructing career craft and how I constructed it, which I conceptualized it as deconstructing and reconstructing very socially embedded career experiences. Next slide, please, Isabel. What I mentioned as well, what I found is that compared to, you know, various transition theories, you know, anthropological, psychological, social transition theories, ending often is, you know, relative stability. whereas I found this was constantly changing. You know, we live in a constantly evolving, dynamic world. So what I found is that equilibrium was dynamic. So you're always crafting, or these people were always crafting, you know, constantly. And I think in practice, you know, because of course, again, big caveat, this was grounded theory. It's not meant to be generalizable at all, but we like to have some learnings from this. So, you know, it's a heuristic, at least a model. It could be a discussion framework for career professionals. What I found since the research, I've been talking to people about it, it's been resonating with people, you know, not just lawyers. So that's been quite interesting to me. So I'm very curious to know how the audience, you know, whether it resonates with yourselves or your friends or your colleagues as well. And basically you can use, you know, these transition career professionals can use this to explore, you know, adjustment and adaptation, and using craft as a theoretical lens, especially recognizing this tension of continuity in the change process. So that's just, you know, very quick snapshot of my labor of love over you know, a good number, or last year. And yeah, very, very happy for any questions from anybody in the audience.
Thank you very much. It was actually quite nice that it followed Victoria's talk, because there are quite a few similarities and themes and topics that were sort of coming out of there in terms of breaking free and you know, the emergence and the changes. So we've got some time for questions. We can take some questions now.
Or later, if you know, feel shy to ask now, feel free to reach out later. That's also fine.
Well, I can start off with the question that when you were telling us about the shaping and the carving, that was just so interesting and quite an emotive sort of terminology and use of words as well. Could you talk to us about what it was like for you in the interviews when you were sort of hearing these things, or when you were coding and laboring with the data?
Yes, I must say it was really an aha moment, because my first participant used, you know, I don't know whether I used that quote, "You don't fit into the job." I mean, you know, you're not fitting into the job, you're carving it, shaping it to fit you, basically. And that was so visceral. It really was. Yes. Physically hearing that. And I had this, oh my goodness. And we had been studying job crafting. That was a funny thing at Birkbeck, right? On one of the courses. And I'd never heard of career crafting. And so I was like, wait a minute, this is like job crafting, but job crafting is a completely different concept. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, some people have actually researched career crafting. And that's when I, you know, and in a way, that's when I connected the dots. But it was very powerful coming from the participants, actually.
Thank you. Cordelia, yes, please.
Hi, also testing that I have connection, which hopefully I do. So Nomita, listening to you, and as you know, we shared our journey really with our masters, but the penny that dropped listening to you just now was actually also about that sort of crafting thing, and it made me think about the relationship between art and craft. Yep. You know, and to what extent crafting is a creative process. And I think what resonated with me as somebody who's now at least partly self-employed is it does feel very creative. Yep. You know, it does feel like something you're kind of making up as you go along and, you know, following along. And I wondered if that came from your participants at all.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you know, these are lawyers, right? They're not known for to be creative. They're extremely linear and see themselves as very logical. But I think absolutely, you know, it was very, very strong. And many of them actually had other interests, you know, in a way, and other things. So it really was a creative, to me, very much a creative process, and hard, you know, and hard, not easy. You know, some of them had difficult journeys, questioning, self-doubt, always feeling that, you know, they weren't failures, you know, in that kind of profession. But at the end of it, yeah, I felt that they were very creative, absolutely.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nomita. Oh, Susan, yes, we can come for one more question before we move on.
Just something. Hello, Nomita. Lovely to see you again after a long time. I just have a brief question I was quite interested in. You talked about the co-constructed nature of your research, and I was just wondering, as a lawyer yourself, what would have happened if you hadn't been of the same professional? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of the things which I haven't put in is the emphasis on reflexivity. So one of the things I was very conscious about is that participants may be giving me the story that they thought I wanted to hear to affirm my own journey as well. You know, given that now I'm essentially self-employed as well. So I was very, very conscious about that. And it was because I was a lawyer, the story that they were telling me may have been very different from, you know, they told somebody else's story. So absolutely, if somebody else interviewed the same data set, you know, with the same questions, I think they'd have a, you know, very different experience from me. Absolutely.
And just a quick follow-up, does it encourage you to do similar research with other sort of professional services or other kind of individuals?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think through my own coaching practice, I'm using, you know, this framework, and I feel that it is resonating with people who aren't lawyers. So that for me has been, you know, quite interesting. Yes, for sure.
Well, fascinating. Lovely to hear about it. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Nomita. I will pass on to Janet now.
Janet, you're on mute.
Delighted to see that you're reconnected, Cordelia. Looks like you're okay to go. So we're delighted now to hear about your work with sort of retirement.
Yes, well phrased. Thank you. So I'm Cordelia, and the research I undertook was sort of qualitative to look at the relationship between career and retirement. Next slide, please, Isabel. So my background, as Janet mentioned, is I've worked in the voluntary sector for quite a number of years, and I'm very much a practitioner in my approach. And over that time, I've encountered a lot of people who've come in to volunteer who've recently retired. And these would be people who would be really exploring a new way of life and trying things out, trying courses, trying volunteering, maybe doing some part-time work. And it always struck me listening to their stories and actually, you know, walking alongside with them as they kind of tried things out, that this is very much a career decision. If you take career, as I do, to go beyond paid work into kind of, you know, meaningful occupation, as it were, in your life. Next slide, please. So I began to read around about retirement, and I suppose what struck me is very much that, you know, our approach to retirement has really changed over time, and that actually retirement is a relatively recent phenomena as well. You know, in the UK, retirement as an expected practice came after World War II, and it's very much been the domain of the privileged. It has been the more wealthy countries where retirement has been seen as what you do when you hit a certain age. Also, of course, people are living longer. So, you know, it's there's a different relationship with retirement, which is there, and I think in the career literature there wasn't much mention of retirement. There was a lot of focus on early career and mid-career transitions, and retirement was seen as the end of the career, and that was that, with the exception of the developmental school. So Super talked about retirement as decline, and then he talked about disengagement. He kind of revised that approach. But over the last 10 years, there's been a real proliferation of writing and thinking about retirement, and lots of terms which have been used to describe this stage in life. For example, unretiring, where you go back back to work after you've been working, or encore career, which might be a second career in a retirement age, for example. What there hasn't been is very much qualitative work to look into people's experience of this phase of life. So that's what I was interested in doing. Next slide, please. So I spoke to 13 people who were all over 55. I contacted them via my personal and professional networks, and they were people who were semi-retired by choice, because what I was interested in was choices, how people were making choices in this phase of life. I used thematic analysis to analyze the transcripts, and what I found that I needed to do was kind of separate myself from the people, because I am a practitioner and I really value people's stories. I needed to separate myself a little bit from that. And I ended up using a frequency table actually to check that what was in the transcripts was kind of consistent across the transcripts, rather than something that I ran off and got excited about as I was doing the research. Next slide, please. So in terms of findings, very much one of my research questions was whether participants would see sort of the semi-retired phase as being part of a life stage, or maybe part of a role transition. What came back resoundingly was people saw it as a life stage. So the word stage and age and reference to life stage were used very consistently across the group of people I spoke to. The second finding was around the importance of choice and agency. So while, of course, these were people who were semi-retired by choice, they also mentioned choice. Choice was very much a theme for them, both in choosing what to do, but also in terms of choosing what not to do, came up as very important to them. Additionally, there was an interesting theme that came across about how the work they were doing was seen. So they saw it as a little job, something to pick up, something I can take or leave, odds and ends, bits and pieces. So it was, you know, there was something quite, I can't think what the word is, quite light about the attitude to the part-time work they were doing. And also the question of career itself was quite interesting within the group. There was quite a difficult relationship with career. Either people said, oh, career, I didn't have one, you couldn't call what I did a career, or what I'm doing now is not part of my career. Which was interesting. And finally, some quite sort of strong divided emotions about the topic. So lots of positive emotions, lots of people talking about being excited and enjoying this phase of life, but also people talking about feeling bored, feeling guilty, feeling anxious as well. Next slide, please. So just in terms of the sort of thinking around this, a bit of discussion, and I'll summarize because I'm very aware of time. I think most people who I spoke to would never have described themselves as semi-retired. One or two did, but most people said, oh no, I work part-time, or I consult. And a lot of what I picked up did echo sort of research around baby boomers, around the importance of choice to this group of people. But the sort of theme of work being taken or left is not much mentioned in the literature. So but there was a little mention, but not a lot of that. Next slide, please. Just a few things in terms of limitations. I mean, surely by the effect of snowballing, I ended up speaking largely to white women. So I'm very aware of that. And also I'm very aware of the voice of the people who didn't choose to be semi-retired, you know, who were forced into that position through illness or redundancy or difficulty with the job market. And I think there's a really interesting question for practice if the question of career is uncomfortable and the word retirement is uncomfortable, then how do we phrase an offer that we might be making in this space? Because there's very much a need, I think, for people who are you know, offering some career support around late career. So that's me. Next slide, please. So feel free to contact me if you want to, and I'm really happy to take questions, and I'm very relieved that the internet seems to have stayed with me.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cordelia. We have very few minutes for some questions and answers. So if everyone's all right to sort of hang tight for a few more minutes, we can do a round of questions here. Julie.
Hi, Cordelia. Sorry. Thanks for that. That was absolutely fascinating. And I was particularly interested in the language part of it, when you talked about what people were saying about little bits of work, you know, odds and ends and stuff. And I just wondered if you'd sort of drill down into that anymore, about sort of where that was coming from.
Yeah, good question. I think it was to do with the importance of having a choice. I think a lot of people saw their jobs as something that they sort of had to do, and that this was a phase in their lives where they were making a choice. So they could take work up or they could put it down, but they didn't have to engage with it. Yeah.
Might be able to squeeze another quick one in there.
If I may, Cordelia, if we are going to come up with some other word for retirement, what exactly are we going to use?
You know, I really don't know, and I've thought about it in terms of my coaching. Interestingly, I do find people, because I think I mention, you know, that retirement is sort of on the list and the research, I do find people are gravitating towards me. And Janet's heard this story before, but a person recently contacted me for coaching and said what I was thinking of doing was a little LIDL job. So, you know, it does come, but I don't, if anybody has any terms that feel right to them, please tell me, because I'm still grappling with it myself.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much to all our speakers, Victoria, Nomita, Cordelia. Thank you very much to all of the participants that have come. I know in the audience we've got a really nice mix between current students, future students who will be starting with us in September, and then potential students who might be starting with us in a couple of years because you came and listened to the fantastic talks and thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to join Birkbeck and do some research. This will sort of give you a really good idea of some of the groundbreaking work that we're doing here, but also an idea of the standards and some of the diversity of topics that we supervise and we encourage here at Birkbeck in terms of doing your Masters in Career Coaching or Coaching Psychology with us. So thank you very much to Isabel for supporting the session. It is being recorded, so we will share it, and feel free to share it widely among your networks as well, so we can spotlight all of this great work. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.